Welcome, weary soul, to this quiet space where the noise of the world cannot reach. If your heart has been heavy with questions, if your mind has been wrestling with the mysteries of life, if you find yourself searching for wisdom in the midst of uncertainty, then this moment was prepared just for you. Tonight, we journey together through the ancient words of Ecclesiastes and James, two voices that speak across the centuries with profound understanding of what it means to be human. The stars above us shine with the same light that guided the wise teacher of Ecclesiastes and illuminated the path for James as he penned his letter to believers scattered across distant lands. Under these same quiet stars, we find ourselves drawn to truths that have comforted countless souls before us. In a world that moves at breakneck speed, demanding answers we do not have, and promising fulfillment it cannot deliver, we pause here to listen to wisdom that transcends time itself. Before we begin our exploration, let us settle our hearts in prayer. Father, as we open your word tonight, we come not as those who have all the answers, but as seekers longing for your truth. The teacher in Ecclesiastes wrestled with life's deepest questions, and James wrote to those facing trials and uncertainties. We too come with our questions, our struggles, our need for understanding. Speak to us through these ancient words. Let them bring clarity to our confusion, peace to our restlessness, and hope to our weary spirits. May your wisdom penetrate the depths of our hearts and transform how we see our days under the sun. In Jesus' name, we pray. Amen. The book of Ecclesiastes opens with words that echo through the corridors of human experience like a gentle bell tolling in the distance. These are not harsh words meant to discourage, but honest observations from one who has walked the paths we walk, who has searched where we search, who has questioned what we question. The teacher, traditionally understood to be King Solomon in his later years, speaks with the voice of one who has tasted both the heights of success and the depths of disillusionment. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 1. The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. These opening words might seem stark, even troubling, but they carry within them a profound invitation to look beyond the surface of our daily existence. The teacher is not declaring life worthless, but rather pointing us toward what truly matters by showing us what does not ultimately satisfy. Like a skilled physician who must first diagnose before he can heal, the teacher begins by naming the restlessness that every human heart knows. The Hebrew word translated as meaningless here is hebel, which literally means vapor or breath. Picture the mist that rises from a cup of hot coffee on a cold morning, visible for a moment before it dissipates into the air. This is not to say that our lives are without purpose or value, but rather that when we seek our ultimate meaning in temporary things, we grasp at vapor. The teacher invites us to consider the cyclical nature of existence, the way the sun and wind and streams follow their appointed courses, and to ask ourselves where we fit into this grand design. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, "See, this is something new"? It was here already long ago. It was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. Here, the teacher touches something universal in human experience. We live in an age that promises constant novelty, endless entertainment, perpetual stimulation for our senses. Yet despite all our advances, despite all our innovations, the deepest longings of the human heart remain unchanged. We still seek love, meaning, security, hope. We still face loss, disappointment, mortality, loneliness. The fundamental questions that kept our ancestors awake at night are the same ones that stir in our hearts as we lie in the darkness. The teacher is not promoting cynicism, but rather clearing away illusions so that we might build our lives on firmer foundations. When we recognize that the endless pursuit of more will never satisfy the deepest hungers of our souls, we become free to seek satisfaction where it can actually be found. When we acknowledge that human memory is short and human achievement is temporary, we become free to find our significance in something eternal. I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. What a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. The teacher speaks from a position of ultimate privilege and opportunity. As king, he had access to every pleasure, every experience, every form of knowledge that his world could offer. Yet from this vantage point of having it all, he declares that he has discovered a fundamental truth about the human condition. We are burdened with consciousness, with the ability to contemplate our existence, to question our purpose, to long for something beyond what we can see and touch. This burden is not cruel, but sacred. It is the very thing that makes us human, that separates us from the animals who live only in the present moment. We are created with eternity in our hearts, as the teacher will later observe, and this creates both our greatest anguish and our greatest hope. We are restless because we are made for something more than what this world can provide. I said to myself, "Look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind, for with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief." Here we encounter one of the great paradoxes of human existence. The very gift that elevates us above the rest of creation, our capacity for understanding, also becomes a source of suffering. The more we learn about the world, the more we discover its brokenness. The more we understand about human nature, the more we see our own limitations and failures. Knowledge without wisdom leads to despair. Wisdom without hope leads to cynicism. Yet the teacher does not counsel ignorance. He does not suggest that we should stop seeking to understand. Instead, he is preparing us to receive knowledge and wisdom in their proper context, to see them as gifts that point us toward their giver rather than ends in themselves. The grief that comes with deeper understanding is not meaningless, but meaningful, not destructive, but constructive, because it drives us to seek comfort and hope beyond ourselves. I said to myself, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good." But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness, and what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. The teacher embarks on what we might call the ultimate experiment in hedonism. With unlimited resources and absolute power, he sets out to discover whether pleasure can provide the meaning and satisfaction that the human heart craves. This is not the reckless abandon of a fool, but the careful investigation of a wise man. He maintains his wisdom even as he explores folly, observing and analyzing his experiences with the detached eye of a researcher. The results of this experiment speak to every generation. In our age of unprecedented access to entertainment, comfort, and sensory pleasure, we find ourselves no more satisfied than our ancestors. The temporary highs of pleasure give way to emptiness. The momentary escape from reality only makes our return to it more jarring. The teacher is not condemning pleasure itself, but rather the pursuit of pleasure as an ultimate good, as the answer to life's deepest questions. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. The teacher's experiment extends beyond mere pleasure into the realm of achievement and accumulation. He becomes the ultimate success story by every earthly measure. His building projects would have been monuments to human ingenuity and ambition. His wealth would have been legendary. His cultural patronage would have made his court the center of learning and entertainment. By every standard that the world uses to measure a successful life, the teacher had achieved the pinnacle. Yet even as he catalogs these accomplishments, there is a note of detachment in his voice, a recognition that he is describing empty victories. The very way he lists his possessions, including human beings as property, reveals the dehumanizing effect of treating people and experiences as commodities, to be consumed rather than gifts to be cherished. The pursuit of more had led not to fulfillment, but to a kind of spiritual numbness. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done, and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Here lies the heart of the teacher's profound discovery. Even success, even the fulfillment of every ambition and desire, ultimately leaves us empty if we seek our meaning in these things alone. The pleasure he experienced was real, The achievements were genuine, the satisfaction was authentic in its moment. But none of these things could bear the weight of ultimate significance that he had placed upon them. This is perhaps the most difficult truth for our achievement-oriented culture to accept. We are taught from childhood that success will bring happiness, that accomplishment will bring meaning, that having more will make us more. The teacher, having tested these assumptions with unlimited resources, reports back to us that they are false, not partially false, not false for some people, but fundamentally and universally false. The word meaningless appears again and again in these opening chapters, but it is not the meaninglessness of nihilism. It is the meaninglessness of misplaced hope, of seeking infinite satisfaction in finite things. The teacher is not declaring that life has no meaning, but rather that life's meaning cannot be found in the places where we typically look for it. The teacher's journey through the landscape of human experience continues with an examination of wisdom itself. Having explored pleasure and achievement, he now turns his analytical mind toward the very faculty that enables such analysis. This is perhaps the most sobering part of his investigation, for if wisdom itself proves insufficient to provide ultimate meaning, then where can the searching soul find rest? Then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fool walks in the darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. Here the teacher acknowledges what every honest seeker must eventually confront. Wisdom is indeed superior to foolishness, just as light is preferable to darkness. The person who thinks clearly, who observes carefully, who learns from experience, has obvious advantages over the one who stumbles through life without reflection or understanding. Yet both the wise and the foolish share the same ultimate destiny. Death comes to the brilliant philosopher and the simple peasant alike. Time erases the memory of both the genius and the fool with equal efficiency. This observation might seem to undermine the very pursuit of wisdom, but the teacher is not advocating ignorance. Rather, he is placing wisdom in its proper context. Wisdom is good, but it is not ultimate. It is a gift to be treasured, but not a god to be worshipped. When we recognize the limitations of even our highest human faculties, we become open to receiving wisdom from a source beyond ourselves. Then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself, this too is meaningless, for the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die. The teacher confronts here what philosophers call the problem of mortality. If our individual lives are brief flickers in the vast darkness of time, if our names will be forgotten and our achievements will crumble, then what significance can any of our efforts possess? This is not merely an intellectual puzzle, but an existential crisis that strikes at the heart of human ambition and hope. Yet even as he voices this concern, the teacher is engaging in an act that transcends the very futility he describes. By writing these words, by preserving these observations for future generations, he demonstrates an intuitive understanding that some things do endure beyond individual mortality. Truth has a way of surviving, even when those who first spoke it have returned to dust. Wisdom, when it is true wisdom, becomes part of the inheritance of humanity. So I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish? Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil, into which I poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. The teacher reaches what appears to be the lowest point in his spiritual journey. The word hatred here is strong and shocking. This is not mere disappointment or frustration, but a deep revulsion at the apparent absurdity of human existence. He has invested his life in building, creating, achieving, only to realize that everything he has worked for will pass into the hands of others who may squander it or use it for purposes he would never approve. This hatred is not the final word, but it is a necessary passage through the valley of honest despair. Many seekers try to bypass this dark night of the soul, attempting to maintain artificial optimism in the face of life's genuine difficulties. But the teacher shows us that true wisdom often requires us to face the full weight of our mortality and limitations before we can discover what truly matters. The frustration he expresses about leaving his wealth to unknown successors touches on a universal human anxiety. We pour ourselves into our work, our relationships, our creative endeavors, hoping to build something lasting, only to realize that we have no ultimate control over what happens to our legacy. This loss of control, this recognition of our fundamental powerlessness over the future, can either drive us to despair or humble us into seeking meaning beyond our own efforts. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. For a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then they must leave all they own to another who has not toiled for it. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days their work is grief and pain. Even at night their minds do not rest. This too is meaningless. The teacher's despair deepens as he contemplates not just the ultimate futility of human effort, but the immediate suffering it often entails. The phrase anxious striving captures something essential about the modern human condition. We live in a state of constant tension, always reaching for the next goal, the next achievement, the next level of security or success. This striving becomes its own form of suffering, robbing us of peace even when we achieve what we sought. The observation that even at night their minds do not rest speaks to anyone who has ever lain awake, worrying about tomorrow's challenges or replaying today's failures. The teacher recognizes that the pursuit of meaning through achievement creates a kind of chronic anxiety that follows us even into our hours of supposed rest. We become prisoners of our own ambitions, slaves to our own dreams of significance. Yet in naming this suffering so clearly, the teacher is preparing the ground for a different kind of understanding. Sometimes we must fully experience the bankruptcy of false solutions before we can receive true ones. The deepest despair often precedes the greatest breakthrough. not because despair itself is good, but because it clears away the illusions that prevent us from seeing reality clearly. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too, I see, is from the hand of God, for without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? To the person who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness, but to the sinner he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Here, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, we encounter the first glimmer of hope in the teacher's investigation. After cataloging the futility of seeking ultimate meaning in pleasure, achievement, and wisdom, he discovers something that transforms everything. The simple acts of eating, drinking, and finding satisfaction in daily work become profound when we recognize them as gifts from God's hand. This is not a retreat into mindless hedonism or shallow contentment. Rather, it is the discovery that meaning comes not from the magnitude of our achievements, but from the source of our blessings. When we receive our daily bread, our daily work, our daily joys as gifts from a loving Creator, even the most ordinary moments become sacred. The same meal that felt empty when pursued as an end in itself becomes rich with significance when received as divine provision. The teacher introduces here a theme that will resonate throughout the rest of his exploration. True satisfaction is not something we can manufacture through our own efforts, but something we receive from beyond ourselves. This does not diminish human agency or responsibility, but rather places them in proper context. We are not the authors of our own meaning, but recipients of meaning that flows from its ultimate source. The distinction the teacher makes between those who please God and those who do not is not arbitrary favoritism, but a recognition of spiritual reality. Those who align themselves with God's purposes find that their labor contributes to something lasting and good. Those who reject this alignment find themselves trapped in endless cycles of accumulation and loss, gathering treasures they cannot keep and pursuing satisfactions they cannot achieve. This understanding begins to resolve the paradox the teacher has been wrestling with. If our significance comes from our relationship with the eternal rather than from our temporal achievements, then death loses its power to render our lives meaningless. If our work matters because it serves God's purposes rather than our own ambitions, then even failures and setbacks become part of a larger story that extends far beyond our individual lifespans. There's a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. These famous verses introduce us to one of the most profound truths the teacher has discovered. Life is not a problem to be solved, but a rhythm to be embraced. The frustration he felt earlier came partly from trying to impose his own timeline and agenda on existence, from demanding that his efforts produce permanent results according to his own design. Now he begins to see that there is a larger pattern, a divine choreography that governs the unfolding of human experience. The beauty of this passage lies not just in its poetic structure, but in its recognition that opposites are not contradictions, but complementary aspects of a complete life. We cannot have meaningful joy without the possibility of sorrow, genuine love without the risk of loss, authentic peace without the experience of conflict. The teacher is learning to see life not as a series of problems to be eliminated, but as a complex symphony in which every note, even the discordant ones, contributes to the overall beauty of the composition. This perspective transforms how we approach both success and failure, both pleasure and pain. Instead of viewing difficult seasons as evidence that something has gone wrong, we can begin to see them as necessary parts of our growth and development. Instead of clinging desperately to good times as if they could last forever, we can receive them as gifts to be treasured without being grasped. The wisdom embedded in these seasonal rhythms speaks to something our modern world has largely forgotten. We live in a culture that promises us control over every aspect of our existence, that suggests we can eliminate inconvenience, avoid discomfort, and maintain perpetual happiness through the right combination of technology, therapy, and personal optimization. Yet the teacher reminds us that this very pursuit of control may be the source of our greatest suffering. What gain have workers from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for mortals than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. Here the teacher reveals perhaps his most penetrating insight into the human condition. We are creatures caught between time and eternity, finite beings with infinite longings, temporal creatures with eternal hearts. This is both our glory and our burden. The very thing that makes us restless and dissatisfied with purely earthly pleasures is also what opens us to divine purposes and eternal significance. The phrase eternity in the human heart explains so much about our experience. Why do we long for love that never ends when all earthly relationships are temporary? Why do we seek justice when the world is full of unfairness? Why do we create art and music and poetry that attempt to capture something beyond words? Because we are made for something more than what this world can contain, yet we must live our daily lives within the constraints of space and time. This tension need not be a source of torment. The teacher is learning that when we accept our limitations while also honoring our eternal longings, we find a different kind of peace. We can embrace the good gifts of each day, eating and drinking and working and loving, not as ultimate satisfactions, but as foretastes of something greater. We can find meaning in the temporary because it points us toward the permanent. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it, and nothing taken from it. God does it so that people will fear him. Whatever is has already been, and what will be has been before, and God will call the past to account. And I saw something else under the sun. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. in the place of righteousness, wickedness was there. The teacher's understanding continues to deepen as he contemplates the contrast between human transience and divine permanence. Everything we build will eventually crumble. Every institution we establish will eventually corrupt. Every system we create will eventually fail. But what God does endures forever, unchanged by the passing of ages, undiminished by the failures of human stewardship. This recognition of God's eternal nature is meant to produce not terror, but proper reverence, what the teacher calls fear. This is not the cowering fear of a slave before a tyrant, but the awe-filled respect of a creature before its creator, the humble recognition that we are not the center of the universe. When we truly grasp the magnitude of divine eternity compared to our brief existence, it puts our daily anxieties and ambitions into proper perspective. The teacher also observes the troubling reality of injustice in human institutions. The very places where we expect to find fairness and righteousness, the courts and governments and religious establishments, are often corrupted by wickedness. This could be a source of despair, but the teacher is learning to see it differently. Human institutions fail precisely because they are human, finite, temporary. The existence of injustice points us toward our need for divine justice that transcends human limitations. I said to myself, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked, for there will be a time for every activity, a time to judge every deed. I also said to myself, as for humans, God tests them so that they may see that they are like the animals. Surely the fate of human beings is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. Humans have no advantage over animals. Everything is meaningless. The teacher confronts here one of the most difficult aspects of human existence, our mortality. From a purely physical standpoint, we share the same fate as the animals. Our bodies return to dust just as theirs do. Our biological processes cease in the same way. This recognition could lead to despair, to the conclusion that human consciousness and creativity and love are merely elaborate illusions covering up our animal nature. But the teacher is not embracing materialism or nihilism. Instead, he is acknowledging the reality of our physical limitations as a necessary step toward understanding our spiritual nature. The very fact that we can contemplate our mortality, that we can be troubled by it, that we can long for something beyond it, suggests that we are more than merely physical beings. Animals do not write poetry about death or create monuments to transcend their mortality. The testing that God allows, including our confrontation with mortality, serves a crucial purpose. It strips away our pretensions and illusions, forcing us to grapple with the ultimate questions. When we truly understand our limitations, we become open to receiving help from beyond ourselves. When we acknowledge our mortality, we become ready to embrace the eternal. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust all return. Who knows if the human spirit rises upward, and if the spirit of the animal goes down into the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better for mortals than to enjoy their work, because that is their lot. For who can bring them to see what will happen after them? The teacher's honesty about the mysteries that remain unsolved is refreshing in its humility. He does not pretend to have definitive answers about the afterlife or the precise nature of human versus animal consciousness. Instead, he acknowledges the limits of human knowledge while pointing us toward the practical wisdom we need for living in the present. This uncertainty about ultimate questions might seem to undermine faith, but the teacher shows us how it can actually strengthen it. When we acknowledge what we cannot know with certainty, we become more dependent on trust, more open to revelation, more willing to live by faith rather than sight. The mystery of what happens after death, rather than paralyzing us with fear, can motivate us to make the most of the life we have been given. The repeated counsel to enjoy our work and find satisfaction in our daily activities is not shallow advice, but profound wisdom. Since we cannot control the ultimate outcomes of our efforts, since we cannot know with certainty what the future holds, we are free to find meaning and joy in the process itself. Work becomes worship when we do it as service to God rather than as a way to secure our own significance. Again, I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter. And I declared that the dead, who had already died, are happier than the living, who are still alive. But better than both is the one who has never been born, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. The teacher's investigation takes him into the darkest corners of human experience, the reality of oppression and injustice that seems to contradict any notion of divine goodness or human dignity. This is not abstract philosophizing, but confrontation with real suffering, with the tears of real people who cry out for help that does not come. The repetition of "they have no comforter" emphasizes the isolation and abandonment that oppression creates. The teacher's declaration that the dead are better off than the living, and that those never born are better still, represents the nadir of his journey into despair. This is not his final conclusion, but rather the honest expression of how overwhelming injustice can feel when we have no framework for understanding it. Sometimes the darkness must be fully acknowledged before the light can be properly appreciated. Yet even in this darkest moment, the teacher's very ability to feel moral outrage at oppression suggests something important about human nature. We are not content to simply observe suffering with detached indifference. We are created with a sense of justice, with an expectation that things should be different, with a longing for the wrongs to be made right. This moral sensitivity, even when it brings us pain, points us toward the reality of a moral universe governed by a just God. And I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. The teacher identifies here one of the most corrosive motivations behind human striving, the spirit of competition and comparison that drives us to pursue achievements not for their own sake, but to surpass others. This insight penetrates to the heart of why so many of our accomplishments leave us feeling empty. When our motivation is envy rather than love, when our goal is superiority rather than service, even genuine achievements become hollow victories. The alternative the teacher proposes is not laziness or indifference, which he rightly identifies as self-destructive folly. Instead, he advocates for a middle way, for finding satisfaction in enough rather than always reaching for more. The handful with tranquility represents a life oriented toward gratitude rather than acquisition, toward contentment rather than competition. This wisdom speaks directly to our contemporary culture of endless comparison facilitated by social media and consumer marketing. We are constantly presented with images of others who seem to have more, achieve more, experience more than we do. The teacher's counsel to find peace with our portion, to measure our lives by internal rather than external standards, offers a pathway out of this exhausting cycle of comparison and envy. Again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. The teacher turns his attention to another source of meaninglessness in human experience, the pursuit of wealth and achievement in isolation from meaningful relationships. The solitary man he describes has everything the world considers valuable, but lacks the one thing that makes prosperity meaningful, someone to share it with. His wealth becomes a burden rather than a blessing, because it serves no purpose beyond his own consumption. The question, "For whom am I toiling?" cuts to the heart of human motivation. When our work serves only ourselves, when our achievements benefit no one else, they lose their significance and become a form of sophisticated slavery. We become prisoners of our own success, driven to accumulate more and more without any clear purpose or endpoint. The teacher's celebration of companionship and mutual support offers a beautiful alternative to this lonely pursuit of individual achievement. The image of two people helping each other up when they fall speaks to the fundamental human need for community, for relationships that transcend mere utility or convenience. We are created for connection, designed to find our meaning partly through our service to others and their service to us. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Better a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer knows how to heed a warning. The teacher extends his meditation on the value of human relationships with practical examples that illustrate deeper spiritual truths. Physical warmth becomes a metaphor for emotional and spiritual comfort. Mutual defense represents the way relationships protect us, not just from external threats, but from our own destructive tendencies. The 3-stranded cord suggests that the strongest human relationships are those that include divine presence as their foundation. The contrast between the wise youth and the foolish king introduces another of the teacher's recurring themes: the superiority of wisdom over worldly status or accumulated power. Age and position do not automatically confer wisdom, and wisdom can appear in the most unlikely places. The old king's inability to receive warning or correction has made him more vulnerable than the young person who remains teachable and humble. This observation challenges many of our assumptions about authority and success. We often assume that those who have achieved positions of power or accumulated great wealth must possess superior wisdom or virtue. The teacher reminds us that external success can actually insulate us from the very feedback and correction that true wisdom requires. Pride and self-sufficiency, the natural companions of worldly achievement, can blind us to our own foolishness and make us deaf to needed counsel. The youth came from prison to the kingship, or he may have been born in poverty within his kingdom. I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before them. But those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. The teacher observes here the fickle nature of human acclaim and political favor. The same crowds that enthusiastically support a new leader will eventually turn against them, seeking someone else to place their hopes upon. This cycle of expectation and disappointment, elevation and rejection reveals something important about both human nature and the limitations of earthly leadership. The pattern the teacher describes is as relevant today as it was in ancient times. We consistently look to human leaders, whether political, cultural, or religious, to provide the stability and direction that only divine authority can supply. When these leaders inevitably disappoint us or fail to deliver on our unrealistic expectations, we do not question the expectations themselves, but simply transfer them to someone else. This recognition of the transience of human popularity and power is not meant to breed cynicism about leadership, but rather to put it in proper perspective. Human leaders, however gifted or well-intentioned, are finite beings operating within finite systems. They can serve important functions and provide valuable guidance, but they cannot bear the weight of ultimate significance that we often place upon them. The teacher's phrase, "chasing after the wind," appears again, emphasizing the futility of seeking lasting satisfaction in things that are by nature temporary and changeable. The wind cannot be caught or contained, and neither can human fame, political power, or popular approval. These things may be enjoyed when they come, but they cannot be the foundation upon which we build our lives or our sense of meaning. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Go near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools who do not know that they do wrong. Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven, and you are on earth, so let your words be few. A dream comes when there are many cares, and many words mark the speech of a fool. Having explored the vanity of worldly pursuits, the teacher turns his attention to the proper approach to divine worship and spiritual practices. His counsel to guard our steps and go near to listen reveals a profound understanding of the difference between authentic spirituality and mere religious performance. Too often, we approach God with our own agendas, our own demands, our own solutions to present, rather than with the humility to receive what He wants to give us. The sacrifice of fools likely refers to religious rituals performed without genuine reverence or understanding, the kind of worship that focuses more on the external performance than on the internal disposition of the heart. These worshipers do not even realize they are doing wrong because they have confused religious activity with spiritual authenticity. They may be very busy with religious duties while completely missing the point of worship itself. The teacher's warning about hasty speech in God's presence reflects a deep appreciation for divine transcendence. God is in heaven and we are on earth, a reminder of the infinite distance between Creator and creation that should inspire awe and careful reverence rather than casual familiarity. This is not to suggest that God is distant or uncaring, but rather that He deserves our most thoughtful and respectful approach. The comparison between many cares producing dreams and many words marking foolish speech suggests that both anxiety and excessive talking stem from the same source, an inability to rest in God's wisdom and timing. When we are truly at peace with divine sovereignty, we need fewer words because we trust more in divine action. When we are anxious and trying to control outcomes through our own efforts, we tend to multiply both our worries and our words. When you make a vow to God, do not delay in fulfilling it. He has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill your vow. It is better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin, and do not protest to the temple messenger. It was a mistake. Why should God be angry at what you say and destroy the work of your hands? Much dreaming and many words are meaningless. Therefore, fear God. The teacher's instruction about vows reveals his understanding of the serious nature of our commitments to God. In a culture that treats promises lightly and views commitments as tentative and conditional, this ancient wisdom calls us back to the importance of integrity in our spiritual lives. A vow is not merely a human promise, but a sacred commitment that involves divine witness and accountability. The better course, according to the teacher, is not to make vows at all rather than to make them carelessly or with the secret intention of finding excuses to break them later. This is not because God desires to trap us or make our spiritual lives difficult, but because the integrity of our word reflects the condition of our hearts. When we say one thing and do another, we reveal a fundamental disconnection between our stated values and our actual commitments. The reference to protesting to the temple messenger that a broken vow was a mistake shows how human beings naturally try to minimize the significance of their failures and find technical loopholes to avoid responsibility. But the teacher warns that such attempts to evade accountability will only bring divine displeasure and ultimately harm our own endeavors. There is no hiding from God behind clever arguments or semantic distinctions. The final counsel to fear God brings us back to one of the teacher's central themes. This fear is not terror, but reverence, not cowering, but awe-filled respect that recognizes divine authority and responds with appropriate humility. Much of the meaninglessness the teacher has observed in human behavior stems from the lack of this proper fear, this recognition that we are accountable to someone greater than ourselves. If you see the poor oppressed in a district, and justice and rights denied, do not be surprised at such things. For one official is eyed by a higher one, and over them both are others higher still. The increase from the land is taken by all. The king himself profits from the fields. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. The teacher returns to the theme of oppression and injustice, but now with a more systematic understanding of how corruption operates within human institutions. The hierarchy of officials watching one another creates a system where everyone is both oppressor and oppressed, where each level exploits those below while being exploited by those above. This creates a kind of institutional momentum toward injustice that transcends the intentions of any individual participant. The teacher's counsel not to be surprised at such things is not an endorsement of injustice, but a realistic assessment of human nature and institutional dynamics. When people organize themselves into hierarchies of power, corruption becomes almost inevitable because each person has both the opportunity to abuse those below them and the pressure to satisfy those above them. Understanding this pattern helps us maintain perspective and avoid naive shock when systems fail to live up to their stated ideals. The observation that even the king profits from this system reveals how corruption can become so deeply embedded in institutions that even those at the top may not fully recognize their participation in it. The king may genuinely believe he is serving justice while simultaneously benefiting from the very injustices his officials perpetrate in his name. This systemic blindness makes reform extremely difficult and points us toward the need for divine intervention in human affairs. The teacher's commentary on the love of money provides insight into one of the driving forces behind institutional corruption. Those who love wealth are never satisfied because their desire is not really for money itself, but for the security and status they believe money will provide. Since these deeper needs cannot be truly satisfied by material accumulation, the pursuit becomes endless and increasingly desperate, creating the conditions where people will sacrifice justice and integrity for financial gain. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners, except to feast their eyes on them? The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much, but as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. I have seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children, there is nothing left for them. The teacher observes here one of the great ironies of wealth accumulation. As our possessions increase, so do the people and systems required to manage and maintain them. The wealthy person becomes surrounded by servants, advisors, managers, and various dependents, all of whom consume the very wealth they are meant to preserve. The owner becomes less and less able to actually enjoy their possessions as they become increasingly occupied with protecting and administering them. The contrast between the sweet sleep of the laborer and the sleeplessness of the rich person illustrates how wealth can become a burden rather than a blessing. The laborer's simple life allows for simple rest, while the rich person's mind is constantly occupied with worries about investment strategies, security measures, inheritance planning, and the countless complexities that come with managing significant resources. Abundance, paradoxically, creates its own form of poverty, the poverty of peace and contentment. The teacher's observation about wealth being hoarded to the harm of its owners reveals another way that the pursuit of security can become self-defeating. When people hoard resources out of fear of future need, they often prevent themselves from enjoying the benefits those resources could provide in the present. They become slaves to their own accumulation, sacrificing current happiness for hypothetical future security that may never materialize. The possibility that wealth can be lost through misfortune, leaving children with nothing despite their parents' lifetime of accumulation, points to the fundamental uncertainty that underlies all earthly security. No amount of careful planning or diligent saving can guarantee that our resources will be available when we need them or that they will successfully transfer to the next generation. This uncertainty is not a flaw in the system, but an inherent characteristic of temporal existence that points us toward the need for eternal security. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that they can carry in their hands. This too is a grievous evil. Why should people toil for the wind? All their days they eat in darkness, with great frustration, affliction, and anger. The teacher's meditation on human mortality takes on new depth as he contemplates not just the fact of death, but its implications for how we understand the meaning of our earthly labors. We enter the world with nothing and leave with nothing, regardless of how much we may accumulate in between. This reality raises profound questions about the significance of our efforts and achievements. The phrase "toil for the wind" captures the frustration of pursuing things that cannot be grasped or retained. Wind is powerful and can be harnessed for useful purposes, but it cannot be owned or stored or controlled. Similarly, many of the things we work hardest to achieve, fame, status, wealth, security, have a wind-like quality. They can be beneficial when properly understood and used, but they slip through our fingers when we try to make them the foundation of our lives. The description of people eating in darkness with frustration, affliction, and anger paints a picture of lives consumed by the pursuit of things that ultimately cannot satisfy. This darkness is not just physical, but spiritual and emotional, the darkness that comes from building our lives around illusions. When our primary motivation is accumulation rather than contribution, when our focus is on getting rather than giving, we find ourselves trapped in cycles of dissatisfaction and resentment. Yet from this darkness, the teacher draws us toward a different understanding, one that transforms even our most ordinary experiences into something sacred and meaningful. This too I have seen under the sun is good and fitting, to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun the few days of his life that God has given him, for this is his portion. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them, and to take his portion and rejoice in his toil, this is the gift of God. For he will not much remember the days of his life, because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart. Here we witness a remarkable transformation in the teacher's perspective. The same activities that seemed hollow when pursued as ends in themselves, eating, drinking, working, become rich with meaning when received as gifts from God's hand. The key difference lies not in the activities themselves, but in our recognition of their source and our attitude toward them. When we understand our daily bread as divine provision rather than personal achievement, every meal becomes a communion with our Creator. The teacher's phrase, "this is his portion," introduces a concept that runs throughout biblical wisdom literature. Our portion is not what we can seize for ourselves, but what has been allocated to us by divine wisdom. This shift from grasping to receiving, from demanding to accepting, transforms the entire experience of being human. We are no longer competitors in a cosmic struggle for limited resources, but recipients of carefully measured gifts from an abundant source. The observation that God keeps the heart occupied with joy so that we do not much remember the anxious counting of our days reveals something beautiful about divine mercy. When we are truly present to the gifts of each moment, when we are genuinely grateful for what we have received, we are lifted out of the chronological anxiety that plagues so much human existence. Time becomes less a shrinking resource to be hoarded and more a flowing stream to be enjoyed. This joy is not the forced optimism of positive thinking or the desperate pleasure-seeking of those trying to escape reality. It is the deep contentment that comes from knowing we are loved and cared for by one who has power over all circumstances. It is the peace that surpasses understanding because it does not depend on understanding, the security that remains stable because it is rooted in something beyond the shifting sands of earthly fortune. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, and it lies heavy on mankind, a man to whom God gives wealth and possessions and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires, yet God does not give him power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. It is a grievous affliction. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, and he also has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. The teacher identifies here a particularly tragic form of meaninglessness, the inability to enjoy the very blessings we have received. This is not about lacking good things, but about lacking the capacity to find satisfaction in them. It points to a fundamental truth about human happiness. External circumstances alone cannot create internal contentment. The power to enjoy our blessings is itself a gift that must be received from beyond ourselves. The image of a stranger enjoying what we cannot enjoy ourselves speaks to the irony of lives spent in accumulation without appreciation. Sometimes, the very effort to secure our happiness destroys our capacity to experience it. We become so focused on protecting and increasing our possessions that we forget to actually use and enjoy them. The security we thought we were building becomes a prison that keeps us from the very experiences we were trying to secure. The comparison with a stillborn child is stark and shocking, but it illuminates an important truth about what makes life valuable. Mere existence, even existence blessed with wealth and longevity and many descendants, is not enough if it lacks genuine satisfaction and meaning. The stillborn child, having never experienced the frustration and emptiness of unfulfilled desires, is in some sense better off than the person who lives long but never truly lives. This teaching challenges our assumptions about what constitutes a successful life. We naturally measure success by external metrics: wealth accumulated, years lived, children produced, honors received. But the teacher insists that none of these things matter if the soul remains unsatisfied, if the heart never learns to find joy in the gifts it has been given, if the person never discovers their true portion and learns to be content with it. For it comes in vanity and goes in darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. Moreover, it has not seen the sun or known anything, yet it finds rest rather than he. Even though he should live 1,000 years twice over, yet enjoy no good, do not all go to the same place? All the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. For what advantage has the wise man over the fool? And what does the poor man have who knows how to conduct himself before the living? The teacher's meditation on the stillborn child continues, emphasizing that sometimes non-existence is preferable to an existence devoid of genuine satisfaction. The child that never sees the sun or knows anything at least finds rest, while the person who lives for centuries without enjoying any good remains perpetually restless and unfulfilled. This is not a morbid celebration of death, but a realistic assessment of what makes life worth living. The observation that all our toil is ultimately for our mouth, for our basic appetites and needs, yet these appetites are never truly satisfied, points to the futility of making physical survival and comfort our primary goals. No matter how much we eat, we will be hungry again. No matter how much we accumulate, we will want more. The cycle of need and satisfaction and renewed need continues until death. And if this cycle is all our lives consist of, then we are no better than animals driven by instinct. The teacher's question about the advantage of the wise over the fool returns to one of his recurring themes. From a purely materialistic standpoint, both wise and foolish, rich and poor, all face the same ultimate destiny. Death comes to all, and the grave makes no distinction between the brilliant and the ignorant, the wealthy and the impoverished. If temporal existence is all there is, then wisdom offers no ultimate advantage over folly. Yet the very fact that the teacher continues to seek and teach wisdom suggests that he intuitively understands there is more to the story. The advantage of wisdom may not be apparent when we limit our view to earthly existence, but it becomes clear when we expand our perspective to include eternal realities. The wise person learns to find their portion and be satisfied with it, learns to receive each day as a gift, learns to align their will with divine purposes. Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. Whatever has come to be has already been named, and it is known what man is, and that he is not able to dispute with one stronger than he. The more words, the more vanity, and what is the advantage to man? For who knows what is good for man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow? For who can tell man what will be after him under the sun? The teacher counsels us to find satisfaction in what we can actually see and experience, rather than constantly longing for what we do not have. The wandering appetite represents the restless dissatisfaction that drives us to always be looking elsewhere for fulfillment, always imagining that happiness lies just beyond our current circumstances. This wandering is itself a form of vanity, a chasing after wind that prevents us from appreciating the gifts already present in our lives, the observation that everything has already been named and that we know what man is points to the fundamental constants of human nature. Despite all our technological advances and cultural changes, the basic patterns of human experience remain remarkably consistent across time and geography. We face the same temptations, struggle with the same limitations, long for the same ultimate satisfactions as our ancestors did thousands of years ago. The recognition that man cannot dispute with one stronger than himself introduces the theme of divine sovereignty that will become increasingly important as we transition to the book of James. We are not the ultimate arbiters of our own destiny, not the final judges of what is right and wrong. not the source of our own meaning and purpose. There is one stronger than we are, and wisdom begins with acknowledging this reality rather than fighting against it. Under these quiet stars that have watched over countless generations of seekers, we have walked with the teacher through the landscape of human longing and discovered alongside him that our restlessness itself points toward rest, our questions toward answers, our temporal hungers toward eternal bread. The ancient wisdom of Ecclesiastes and James reminds us that meaning is found not in what we can grasp, but in what grasps us, not in our achievements under the sun, but in our relationship with the one who set eternity in our hearts. May you carry this peace with you long after these words fade into silence.